In this episode, we leave Arizona for now. We'll return almost 8 months later and head into New Mexico for 5 nights staying in 2 different RV parks. Hi, I'm Dave Atkinson and welcome to Life on the Straight. Thank you for watching, and if you'd like to follow our 2-year journey as it unfolds, please consider subscribing, which is free. On February 26th, we headed off on a 228-mile drive to Hacienda RV Resort in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Only one road to take, Interstate 10 all the way and due east. As we approached the border between Arizona and New Mexico, there was significant agriculture going on around the town of San Simon. Row after row of orchards going out as far as we could see, and other circular irrigation fields growing as well. I think that we always used to think of Arizona as one big desert except for Phoenix, Tucson, and a few other cities, but that was clearly not the case. From the leafy green crop production of Yuma to huge fields south of Phoenix to what we were seeing as we approached New Mexico, Arizona produced an incredible amount of food. Something else that we were seeing a lot of were freight trains. Train tracks would often parallel highways and freeways, and it seemed that whenever we were on the road, we would see impossibly long trains speeding down the tracks. Trains and trucks. Countless semi-trucks at all hours of the day and night. I know that we take for granted having stores all stocked up with goods whenever and wherever we want, but all of the goods in the world doesn't matter if you can't move things from where they are harvested or built to where they are needed. During our travels, we increasingly became appreciative of the people who drove the trains and the trucks, for without them, we would be living in the third world. Hacienda RV Resort was rated the best RV park in Las Cruces, and it was indeed a very nice and modern park with everything either paved or landscaped. We would only be here for 3 nights. Our first order of business was to replenish Buzzy's prescription food, and luckily the local PetSmart was able to confirm Buzzy's prescription with our vet and then sell us the correct food. Without knowing where we could reliably find his food, we would stock up whenever we could. One of G2's larger exterior lockers was mostly taken up with Buzzy's food and bags of litter, and we kept his fluids, lines, and needles inside the coach. I have been staying in touch with our commercial realtor back in Coeur d'Alene as far as any takers for our Dalton Place business park. 7 years had passed since we closed our Red Shed espresso business, mostly due to the Great Recession, but the demand for commercial space still hadn't recovered enough where we could afford to raise our lease rates. We were mostly just thankful that we had the tenants that we had, but the depressed lease rates are what drove the value of the property. We agreed to lower our asking price once again, and this time our best tenant reached out to us in terms of buying the entire place. Unfortunately, the finances didn't pencil out for him, so we were back to square one. The day after we arrived in Las Cruces, we headed off on US 70 towards White Sands National Monument. Just driving out of Las Cruces was extraordinary, as clouds and mist were flowing down from the towering peaks of the nearby Organ Mountains that sit upon Las Cruces' doorstep. As we reached San Augustin Pass, the temps were below freezing and I was watching for ice, but the highway quickly descended to the desert floor, which brought with it warmer temps. As we approached White Sands, guess what? If another Border Patrol inspection was your answer, you win. Anyway, we continued our drive and entered the National Monument. There was basically one road that took us back into the dunes, and then once we were back there, the road branched off to form a loop. There were places to stop and walk the boardwalks or just walk on the pure white sand. This was a place where you really needed to wear sunglasses because if you didn't know that it was sand, you'd swear it was snow. It gets windy there, although it was calm during our visit. In a huge parking section, they had benches with huge curved shelters coming up and over whoever was sitting there, and they were right next to raised charcoal barbecue stands. I can't think of anything I'd like to do more than be grilling a steak while sand-carrying winds were blowing all around. We witnessed some kids snowboarding down the dunes, and we also saw some unique vegetation that had adapted to surviving in this harsh environment. We drove back to the entrance and went into the visitor center where we grabbed a sandwich and some postcards. Then it was back towards Las Cruces with a detour at the White Sands Missile Range. The missile range was a military site, and we first had to pass through their security. We were told not to take any pictures in the direction of the range, but we could take them of the outdoor missiles and aircraft exhibits, which was funny because as we walked around the various missiles and aircraft on display, we were probably snapping pictures in the direction of the range anyway. Before we could proceed to the museum, we were seated in an office where military people took our ID and essentially vetted us. During World War II, one of Germany's most feared weapons was the V-2 rocket. As the war was winding down, the U.S. Army found where they had been produced. There were over 250 rockets in some stage of completion, along with countless parts. All of that was shipped to the United States and loaded into almost 300 freight cars destined for White Sands for testing and study. One of those V-2 rockets was on display in its own special building, lying horizontally so we could walk all around it. We spent quite a bit of time outside walking through the missile and aircraft exhibit. It was simply a staggering number of technologies on display. Patriot, Nike Hercules, Sidewinder, Redstone, TOW, multiple launch rocket system, and so many others that we had never heard of. Then we headed indoors to their museum and gift shop. And interesting side notes, the oryx is a type of antelope from Africa, and in 1969, the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish introduced them into the missile range as part of their exotic animal introduction program. Why? Who knows? Well, these creatures thrived in the area beyond expectations and are now considered a nuisance as they have caused many traffic accidents in the area, and they've even been seen on the runways of nearby Holloman Air Force Base. To help control them, the Game Department had instituted a hunting season with licenses issued by the lottery system. After winning a lottery, a hunter cannot reapply. It is a once-in-a-lifetime hunt. Another interesting side note. On display was a Darth Vader helmet that was donated by the sound guy from Lucasfilms. He visited the missile range twice in 1978 to record sounds of different rockets and missiles being test-fired, and some of those sounds made it into the movie Star Wars. The museum was full of fascinating exhibits, but one of the more sobering ones was a 1/3 scale model of the first nuclear device ever assembled and sitting atop the 100-foot tower at Ground Zero, Trinity Site. The Trinity Site was about 65 miles north of the White Sands National Monument Visitor Center, but we didn't drive up to see it. On the way back towards the RV park, we spotted what looked to be an upscale community just off the freeway, so we took that exit and headed over to check it out. What was most impressive was the usage of big rocks with flat faces that were used for walls between homes and for retaining walls holding up the surrounding land, as the development was mostly on a hillside. The houses all had stucco walls and were impressive on their own, and some had unobstructed views of the Oregon mountain range, which is an amazing sight. On the final day of February, we headed to Walmart for groceries and Home Depot for a better ladder than what we had been carrying with us. I took care of our end-of-month bookwork, and we just stayed in G2 for the rest of the day. On March 1st, we filled up G2's gas tank and departed to a place that I really was excited to see, Carlsbad Caverns. This would be about a 200-mile day of travel for us, and our first entrance to Texas before we headed north and back up into New Mexico again. The Texas border was only 22 miles from the RV park in Las Cruces, so we were there in no time. Buzzy decided to lie up on the big dashboard for part of the drive, laying on his fluffy throw. Rather than continue on Interstate 10 through the heart of huge and busy El Paso, and that metro area is home for roughly 850,000 people, we took State Route 375 exit that led us up and over the Franklin Mountains, effectively bypassing the city. The downslope was tough on G2 as the engine revs forced the transmission to shift up on more than one occasion, making me rely more on G2's disc brakes. The highway took us through the U.S. Army's Fort Bliss and dropped us onto US 62, which would take us all the way to our destination. Let me tell you, if you were searching for a desolate stretch of highway to travel on, you couldn't have done much better than the route we were on. It was common to see a sign like "No services next 150 miles" while on this road. Every now and then there would be a ghost town-like group of abandoned buildings or a long vacant gas station. As the highway turned to a more northeasterly direction, we approached Guadalupe Mountains National Park, which is only one of two national parks within Texas, the other being Big Bend. We started gaining elevation, and shortly before crossing back into New Mexico, I pulled off into a rest stop to join several other vehicles. When I got out of G2, my feet relayed to me what I felt when driving. It was bitter cold outside, and the road was icy slick in spots. That kind of blew me away. Here we were on March 1st, close to Mexico, and I had to concern myself with icy roads. We got back onto the highway, and I would look at G2's outdoor temperature gauge from time to time, and when it headed back up into a more comfortable number, I resumed our normal cruising speed until we pulled into the city of Carlsbad. Carlsbad RV Park was no Hacienda RV Park, that was for sure. It was barren and nothing but dirt and gravel, with plenty of long-term residents. The problem was that Carlsbad had very few choices, and this was the best of the small bunch. After we got the Honda disconnected and G2 all plugged in and set up, we drove into this sad-looking town, first for a couple items at Walmart and second for lunch at IHOP. We would only be here for 2 nights, so we could handle it. The next morning we gassed up the Honda and headed south to Carlsbad Caverns National Park. As we turned off the highway onto the access road to the park, we first passed through a pathetic-looking tourist town called White's City. They have an RV park, gas station, post office, cafe, and one-star motel, I kid you not. Somehow we avoided getting sucked in as we began our ascent up the winding road towards the visitor center. Icicles were hanging on the rock cliffs and vegetation on the way up, testifying to the cold weather. We pulled into the parking lot and walked into the visitor center. There is an elevator that will take you down into the more than 100 caves, and it is a long way down, about a 755-foot drop. One of the employees told us about another way to get into the caves: descend through the natural entrance, which is about 1,000 feet away via a footpath. Thankfully, that's what we decided to do. The path leads into a large amphitheater where during certain times of the year people can sit at dusk and await the huge clouds of bats leaving the cavern for a night of dining out. Unfortunately, we were not here at the right time to witness that very cool-sounding event. As we walked down the steps to the front row of the amphitheater, a path emerged and wound its way down, down, down into the caverns. It was an experience beyond words. This is a huge network of caves. We spent over 4 hours walking several miles through the network of pathways. We took a lot of pictures, but in a place with limited light, pictures do not come close to conveying the actual experience. Coming into the caves via the amphitheater was such a good decision, as it is a downhill walk the entire way, and we would ride the elevator back out. There was a cafeteria and restrooms down in the caves, but we made do with just a bottle of water. Whoever built all the walkways, railings, and lighting throughout deserves a high five, as it was extremely well done. During one of the paths that we were on, we saw a small group of cavers with all their gear, including headlamps, on, with a guy squeezing into an opening barely big enough to crawl in. They offered expert guided tours that would take cavers into portions of the caverns that regular tourists would never see. Just watching that guy disappear into such a small opening in the rocks almost brought on a panic of claustrophobia. Next time, we move from the southwest part of the country into the south, beginning with Texas.